Picture the scenario for a second. You're walking into a really high-end corporate law firm.
Okay, I can picture that.
Right. And on the top floor, a senior partner is just sweating bullets, frantically reading an article about how a new software model just passed the bar exam in the 90th percentile.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it can draft a pristine 50-page legal brief in like 12 seconds. But meanwhile, down in the basement of that exact same building, a plumber is fixing a busted pipe, right?
Whistling while he works.
Exactly, completely unbothered by the news. The person with a $250,000 education is panicking about obsolescence, while the person with a wrench is enjoying ultimate job security.
It's wild, but yeah, that sudden, urgent fear that a machine is finally coming for your job is no longer just some distant sci-fi trope.
No, for the knowledge worker, the threat is sitting right there on your desktop.
It completely inverts the narrative we've been fed for, the last 50 years.
Hold on.
The assumption was always that automation would work its way from the bottom up, right? Starting with physical, repetitive labor on the factory floor, and maybe, eventually, reaching the air-conditioned offices.
But it skipped all that.
Right. The visceral shock everyone is feeling right now stems from the fact that this technology bypassed the physical world almost entirely and went straight for the cognitive fortress.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a stack of incredibly dense source material today, a massive set of analyses dissecting the intersection of artificial intelligence, historical labor trends, and the actual mechanics of the modern workforce.
It's a lot to get through, but it's so important.
It really is. And our mission for you on this deep dive is to bypass the doomsday headlines, extract the raw economic realities of what is actually happening under the hood of this technology, and help you understand precisely what this shift means for your specific career.
Because it does mean something for everyone.
Absolutely. Okay, let's unpack this right now. To understand the future of AI, we kind of have to look back at how society reacted to past technological revolutions, right? Because this panic is not new.
Not at all. You can go all the way back to the Luddites smashing mechanical looms during the Industrial Revolution.
Right. Or even more recently, the 1970s and 80s panic that ATMs would totally eradicate bank teller jobs. Or the whole collapse of manufacturing due to computer automation.
Yeah, but to understand the mechanism of this specific panic, we really need to draw a hard line between the computer automation of the 1990s and the generative AI we are seeing today.
Because it's a completely different beast.
Exactly. Previous software revolutions were entirely rules-based. A human programmer had to write explicit if-then instructions for the computer to follow.
Right.
If a task could be broken down into a rigid, predictable flowchart, well, a computer just couldn't do it. And that protected a massive swath of human labor.
But generative AI doesn't use flowcharts at all.
Yeah.
I was reading through the technical breakdown in our sources, and the mechanism is just fascinating. Large language models, or LLMs, aren't actually thinking or reasoning in the human sense.
No, not at all.
They are giant prediction engines. They ingest billions of data points, text, code, images, and map the mathematical relationships between them.
So when you ask it to draft a legal brief...
Right. It isn't applying the law. It's just calculating the statistical probability of which word should logically follow the previous word based on the millions of legal briefs it has already analyzed.
Which is an incredibly powerful distinction. Because it turns out that a vast amount of what we previously considered cognitive work is actually just highly complex pattern recognition.
Like drafting standard contracts or something.
Exactly. Drafting a contract, translating a document, writing functional boilerplate code. These all rely on predictable linguistic or logical patterns.
And probability engines are vastly superior to the human brain at identifying and replicating those patterns at scale.
Right.
But I do want to challenge the idea that this inevitably leads to mass unemployment, though. Because our sources lean heavily into history to provide perspective, and I keep coming back to that great ATM panic of the 1970s.
Oh yeah, the ATM example is perfect for this.
When the automated teller machine rolled out, economists were literally writing obituaries for the bank teller, a machine that spits out cash 200 to 7 without requiring a salary or a lunch break. The assumption was a one-to-one replacement.
Well, the math on that assumption seems foolproof at first glance.
Yeah.
Introduce a machine that does the job, delete the human.
Right. But the actual outcome was the exact opposite. ATMs reduced the number of tellers needed per branch, yes, but because of that efficiency, operating a single branch became dramatically cheaper.
Which changed the whole business model.
Exactly. Banks realized they could suddenly afford to open branches on every other street corner. They expanded their footprint so aggressively that the banking industry actually ended up hiring more total human tellers across the country than they had before the ATM existed. Automation isn't like a grim reaper taking a whole job. It's more like a sorting hat for tasks.
What's fascinating here is a core economic principle your ATM example highlights, which labor economists call the task versus job framework. We constantly conflate those two words, but they are completely different concepts.
Task versus job.
Right. Technology fundamentally does not automate jobs. Technology automates specific tasks.
And that distinction completely reframes how you evaluate your own workday. Most of us don't just do one thing. A job is this messy bundle of interconnected tasks.
Yeah, look at the lawyer from your opening scenario. The public perception of a lawyer is someone delivering this dramatic closing argument in a courtroom.
Like in the movies.
Exactly. But the reality of a lawyer's job involves hundreds of hours of mundane tasks, reviewing thousands of emails for discovery, researching century-old case law precedents, formatting citations.
Which are highly predictable pattern recognition tasks.
Precisely.
So, if we look at AI not as a grim reaper coming for the job title of lawyer, but rather as a highly efficient yet completely context-blind intern.
It is a great way to put it.
It changes the dynamic. You can hand this intern a mountain of documents and say, hey, find every mention of this contract clause and draft a summary. And the intern does it in 4 seconds.
Right.
But you cannot send that same context-blind intern into a tense mediation session to read the emotional temperature of a hostile opposing counsel and intuitively know when to offer a compromise.
Right, because the intern lacks a model of the physical and emotional world. And that is the crucial limitation of a purely probabilistic text engine.
So the AI handles the data extraction and the drafting.
Yep. And the human lawyer retains the tasks requiring complex judgment, ethical reasoning, and relationship management.
So they aren't replaced.
No. Consequently, that lawyer is no longer spending 60% of their week on document review. They can now take on 3 times as many clients in the same number of hours. Their productivity per hour skyrockets. The task was automated, but the job evolved.
Okay, that sounds great in theory for the senior partner, but here's where it gets really interesting. And honestly, a bit terrifying for the rest of us.
Let's hear it.
When you apply that task versus job framework to the entire global economy, it creates a wildly counterintuitive map of who is actually safe. The jobs with the highest level of immunity to the specific wave of AI are sitting at the extreme opposite ends of the income spectrum.
The barbell effect.
Exactly.
The top and the bottom are insulated, while the pressure is entirely concentrated on the center.
Right, so think about the top tier. The CEO, the lead creative director, the senior strategist, their daily tasks are heavily weighted toward navigating ambiguity, making high-stakes decisions with incomplete information, managing complex human dynamics.
Things an LLM just can't do.
Right. AI doesn't replace them. It acts as a hyper-competent research assistant that feeds them better data, allowing them to make faster strategic moves. They are augmented.
Then look at the opposite extreme. The lowest income physical jobs. The plumber in the basement. The electrician, the home health aide.
I really cannot emphasize enough how safe the plumber is. We tend to totally underestimate how incredibly complex the physical world is because human brains process it subconsciously.
We take it for granted.
We do. But for a machine navigating a cluttered, dimly lit basement to diagnose a uniquely rusted pipe behind drywall, all while the homeowner's dog is barking at it.
Good luck with that.
Exactly. That requires a level of physical dexterity and real-time sensory adaptation that robotics are decades away from achieving. AI can write a brilliant sonnet, sure, but it can't fold a load of laundry or unclog a sink.
Which is so funny to think about. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the resulting economic phenomenon is what labor economists refer to as the hollowing out of the middle.
The shrinking middle class.
Right. The jobs composed primarily of predictable digital information processing tasks are overwhelmingly concentrated in the middle class. Clerical workers, administrative assistants, basic financial analysts, entry-level coders.
The very people who basically followed the societal playbook. Get a degree, learn to manipulate data on a screen, and secure a comfortable spot in the knowledge economy.
Exactly.
It's the people whose entire job description is essentially data translation. Taking information from a spreadsheet, synthesizing it, and putting it into a PowerPoint. or listening to a meeting and turning it into action items.
Yeah.
If your job is acting as a human router for digital information, you are sitting at ground zero of this technological shift.
And the vulnerability of that middle tier introduces a massive friction point into the macroeconomic narrative. Because economists, they love to point to the long arc of history.
Right, the big picture.
They point out that the mechanization to agriculture destroyed farming jobs but created the labor pool for the Industrial Revolution. They point out that the death of physical record stores birthed the vastly larger streaming and live event promotion industries.
The idea that something new always comes along.
Yes. Over a 30-year timeline, technology always creates new, unforeseen categories of labor.
I have to push back on that historical optimism, though, because the macroeconomy is incredibly cold comfort to the individual worker.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's look back at the Luddites during the Industrial Revolution. Yes, the mechanical loom eventually led to thousands of new factory jobs, but the middle-aged artisan handweaver, whose highly specialized skill was rendered obsolete overnight.
He didn't just pivot to becoming a factory floor manager.
No, his livelihood was destroyed, his community collapsed. The new jobs went to a completely different generation, often in totally different geographic locations.
The timeline of human life and the timeline of macroeconomic adjustment simply do not align.
Yeah.
That is the brutal reality of the transition period.
It's a huge gap.
If a middle manager has spent 20 years honing a specific set of administrative skills that a large language model can now execute in 3 seconds, the fact that a booming new industry of AI system architecture is emerging in another state does not help them pay their mortgage this month.
So what does this all mean? If you are a listener sitting in that vulnerable middle right now, if your tasks are primarily digital and routine, how is society actually going to catch you?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question.
Because this technology is scaling at a speed that makes the Industrial Revolution look like a slow-motion film, government regulation moves at a glacial pace, while AI models are achieving massive leaps in capability every 6 months.
This raises an important question about the actual mechanisms of our social safety nets, and our source material highlights an intense scramble among policymakers trying to figure this out.
They are definitely scrambling.
There are massive structural debates happening right now, but we have to be honest. There are no proving solutions, only vast, untested economic experiments.
One of the loudest proposals is a massive government-funded push for retraining programs. The idea is to take the displaced clerical worker and quickly teach them the skills needed to thrive alongside the AI. But historically, retraining has a pretty dismal track record.
It fails repeatedly because it ignores both geography and the realities of human psychology. When the steel and coal industries collapsed, you couldn't simply hand a 50-year-old miner a laptop and tell them to learn Python.
Right.
The cognitive leap and the cultural shift were just too vast. Similarly, retraining a displaced copywriter to become an expert in machine learning database management assumes a fluidity in human skill sets that simply doesn't exist at scale.
Plus, we are trying to train people for jobs that haven't even been invented yet.
Exactly. Furthermore, that leads directly to the more radical economic proposal being debated, which is universal basic income, or UBI.
Right, UBI. The premise being that if AI generates unprecedented wealth and productivity for corporations, but permanently shrinks the need for middle-tier human labor, the government must heavily tax that AI-generated wealth and distribute a baseline monthly income to every citizen, regardless of employment.
The mechanics of implementing UDI on a national scale present staggering economic friction, though.
Like inflation.
Yes. We have seen small, isolated pilot programs where giving people direct cash improves health and entrepreneurial outcomes. But if you implement UBI across an entire nation of 330 million people, while simultaneously seeing a reduction in the production of tangible goods because a segment of the workforce is displaced, you risk catastrophic inflation.
Right, if everyone suddenly has an extra $2,000 a month, but the supply of housing or food hasn't increased, prices simply rise to absorb the new capital.
That makes the math incredibly precarious.
It really does. I also noticed a fascinating push in the sources regarding data rights and intellectual property.
Well, this is a huge debate right now.
Right. The argument goes like this. If an AI model can only write code or generate art because it was trained on millions of lines of code and thousands of images created by human beings, shouldn't those humans receive royalties?
It sounds fair on paper.
Yeah, if the AI replaces a graphic designer using an aesthetic it learned from that exact designer, shouldn't there be a microtransaction paid out to them?
It is a compelling idea. But the logistical enforcement is almost mathematically impossible given how neural networks actually function.
Because it's not just copy-pasting.
Right. An LLM does not store your article or your artwork in a database and paste it into its output. It crushes the data down into mathematical weights and probabilities.
Like blending it into a smoothie.
Exactly. When it generates a new image, it is blending billions of parameters. Tracing a specific output back to a specific creator's input to assign a royalty is like trying to identify which specific raindrop caused a flood. The provenance of the data is completely dissolved.
So if retraining is flawed, UBI is a massive inflation risk, and data royalties are technologically impossible to enforce, it really feels like we are flying blind into a storm.
We're entering an era of intense vulnerability, yes. But what history heavily suggests is that surviving these transitions is rarely determined by the technology itself.
What is it determined by them?
It is determined by intentional political and societal choices. The societies that navigate technological upheaval without collapsing into mass poverty are the ones that actively intervene.
So they don't just let the free market figure it out?
They do not leave the transition entirely to the free market. They actively build aggressive safety nets. They mandate severance structures, and they create new regulatory frameworks that incentivize companies to retain and augment workers rather than simply discarding them for a short-term stock bump.
Because it is so easy to fall into the trap of talking about AI as if it is an autonomous force of nature. We use language that makes it sound inevitable, but AI is just a tool. It is a highly complex string of code sitting on a server farm.
It has no agency. It possesses no desires, no malice, and no master plan for the workforce. It operates strictly within the parameters set by the humans who deploy it.
Software does not wake up one morning and decide to fire an entire department of logistics coordinators. A human board of directors looks at a spreadsheet and makes the decision to fire that department. The technology did not make the choice, people did. If corporate leadership decides to deploy AI solely as a mechanism to slash headcount and concentrate all the resulting financial gains among a small group of shareholders, it will execute that goal with terrifying efficiency.
Conversely, if leadership chooses to deploy that same technology to eliminate the routine drudgery of their workforce,
Which would be amazing.
right, allowing their employees to focus on complex, high-value problem-solving and shares those productivity gains across the organization, well, the AI will execute that goal just as effectively. The burden of the outcome rests squarely on human implementation.
Which means the future of your job is not entirely out of your hands. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want you, the listener, to do an audit of your own professional life. Tomorrow morning, before you open your email, look at your actual tasks.
Break it all down.
Break your job down into its component parts. Ask yourself, how much of my week is spent operating as a human router for predictable data? And how much of my week requires navigating unpredictable human emotions, contextual problem solving, and the kind of hard-earned wisdom that a probability engine just cannot replicate?
The faster you can migrate your daily focus toward the messy, complex, profoundly human elements of your profession, the more resilient your career becomes.
We must also critically evaluate the broader promise of this technology. We are constantly sold the narrative that AI will bring unprecedented productivity, that it will allow us to accomplish in 2 hours what currently takes us 10.
Yeah, but let's look at the historical reality of how the modern workplace handles efficiency.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the economic principles we've unpacked today. We talked about how making a task cheaper and faster often leads to a massive increase in the demand for that task, just like the ATMs and the bank branches.
Right.
So, if AI ultimately allows you to execute your current job in half the time, will the corporate world actually reward you with shorter work weeks, lower stress, and more free time to enjoy your life? Or will the baseline expectation of human output simply double, creating an entirely new, heavily accelerated era of burnout for you?
The ultimate question of the AI revolution isn't just whether machines will take our jobs. It's whether we will